And I'm so excited today because I'm also going to get a chance to kind of interact with some of the colleagues I've worked with throughout the years who I know are experts, who are serious and committed to recovery and are very strategic in how they apply best practices for those who are in recovery. So today we're talking about recovery, and we're talking about different pathways to get clean and sober and psychiatrically stable. There are many pathways, and that's not just one way. And today we're going to talk about several pathways. You know, in my training, we're encouraged to understand that there are three aspects to self. There's your spiritual self, your emotional self, and your physical self. And my instructor at that time made it very clear that if we must hit each domain directly, simultaneously, in order to fully recover. We can't do one of the two. We can't just do two. We have to hit three areas bullseye to get the best outcome. So today we're going to really approach the spiritual aspect and the emotional aspect of recovery. And I'm delighted to be associated with the panelists today. Recovery in behavioral health is a process, not an event. And in this regard, everyone has a different individualized process, although the end results leads to the same place, recovery. Recovery is a process of biopsychosocial, spiritual healing from the ravages of substance abuse and mental illness. In this regard, we'd like to explore the different perspectives of professionals that all lead to healing for those in our community. Our premise is that recovery is possible for anyone, and the methods to get into that portal are many. So we have some esteemed practitioners and managers and directors with us, and we're going to introduce them one at a time. And first, we're going to have a wonderful presentation focusing on faith-based recovery from attorney Moreland, C.J. Moreland, Charles Moreland, J.D. District of Columbia voters know the Honorable Charles Moreland as a Washington, D.C.'s first elected United States representative. In 1990, D.C. voters elected him to the lobby of U.S. House of Representatives to admit D.C. as a state. Jesse Jackson was elected the same year to the U.S. Senate. Mr. Moreland was reelected in 1992 and served until 1994. He attended Howard University and graduated from Antioch University with a BA degree. He received his Juris Doctorate from Antioch School of Law in 1979 and was admitted into the bar in 1980. In the substance abuse community, Charles Moreland is known for his The Way to Freedom book series. He has published 3 faith-based guides to recovery. The first being The Way to Freedom from Life's Many Addictions. Then he produced The Christian Way to Freedom from Life's Many Addictions. And finally, The Way to Freedom from Chemical Addiction. His 4th book, The Spiritual Way to Freedom from Addiction, is due to release before Christmas of 2020. Given the current opiate crisis and the ravaging COVID-19 pandemic, his books couldn't be any more valuable at this time and of greater need. The core message in all of the books is that faith is a miracle cure for addiction. Faith is a miracle cure. His spiritual healing guides teach those in the throes of addiction that the way to achieve freedom from chemical dependency is to unlock the inner spiritual strength which lies in the healing power of divine love. His followers agree that Charles Moreland has created a powerful faith-based recovery and healing series. Delivered in a comforting and caring voice, he provides an uplifting and inspiring faith-based way to recovery. His book includes step-by-step instructions and exercises for combating the compulsive cravings of the mind and blocking the destructive desires of the flesh. I'm honored to introduce you to and bring to the stage Mr. Charles J. Moreland, JD.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for allowing me to take this opportunity to share with everybody the role and the importance of spirituality in recovery. my messages are that when I write, my messages are directed, and I say to the spiritual you, the eternal being that is experiencing human life within your mortal self. The current calamity of COVID-19 and climate change have made it absolutely necessary for everybody, for every human being, to have a clear and sober mind in all that we do. And so it is important first to understand what is spirituality. Well, in all of the universe, there's no force more powerful than divine love. So divine love is the way to connect with the spiritual self, to cause a spiritual awakening. There are many, have been many researchers and scientists even who have determined that spirituality is essential for recovery. In fact, there have been many persons who have recovered from addiction who will testify that spirituality is essential to recovery. I have published 3 books, and the first book I published was The Way to Freedom from Life's Many Addictions. And in the process of passing my book around and working with various pastors in churches, I came across a group led by Dr. Shine and Reverend Ronald Bragg. And so they advised me, listen, your spiritual principles are great, but Christians want to hear and want to read about spirituality in words that resonate with Christians. And so I published The Christian Way. I want to hear for just a minute from Pastor Ron. He made a video that I want to share with you guys for just 1 minute. Would you present Pastor Ron's video?
Good afternoon. My name is Pastor Ron Bragg of Life Covenant Christian Ministry, and the purpose of me coming to you today is to talk to you about the power of spiritual recovery from drug addiction. I want to thank Charles J. Moreland and the esteemed panel guests for having me on today. Listen, a spiritual awakening is the revitalization of one's soul to realize mentally, physically, and emotionally that there's much more to you than meets the eye. I know that all of us are in this fight together, but as we fight, I want people to understand that their connection with Almighty God is the key to break the yoke and the bondage of drug addiction. Mr. Moreland's quest to bring people to the knowledge and a spiritual awakening of oneself through the power of divine love is key in this fight. Hey, I know that we can do it. Let us join this fight and join hands so that we can liberate our brothers and sisters. Thank you. Have a great day.
I want to thank Pastor Ron for coming on and giving us that message. And as I said, it is generally accepted by anybody who has ever recovered from addiction that spirituality is the key. And when I mean recovered, I mean achieve permanent, everlasting recovery, so that there's no longer any desire to get high, to use drugs. Because as long as you're struggling to resist something that you truly desire, then relapse is inevitable. And I've been working with some illustrious individuals over the years who have been really struggling. I won't name any, but some very, prestigious individuals. And the way I know that that they haven't made the spiritual connection is when they ask me a question. They'll say, "How do you get rid of the desire?" Because as long as you're struggling with that desire, then relapse is inevitable. So in my teachings, I point out how you get rid of the desire. How do you get rid of that desire? You have to replace it with something that's greater. And the one element, the one thing that I point to that can give you a higher pleasure, a higher ecstasy than getting high is divine love. Okay? Divine love. And so once you learn to feel divine love, and I teach that, then divine love is the highest ecstasy, the highest joy, the greatest joy. And you can achieve that joy by spiritual awakening. And that's the importance of spirituality. Let's look at a panel of the one that has, You Have Been Chosen. So in the first chapter, in the Christian way, now, as I said, I started with a spiritual way in the Christian community, asked me, put it in words and terms that Christians can understand. So the first chapter I wrote was You Have Been Chosen. This message is directed to the real you, the eternal spiritual being that is you. These lessons will awaken you to the supreme fulfillment and heavenly bliss that blossom from devoutly loving and serving God. And then I matched that with scripture. A number of ministers worked with me, including Reverend Ron and his group. And Luke 10:27 from the King James Version states that thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all their strength, and with all thy mind. Now, a lot of people, when they read the scripture, when Jesus recommended that you love God, that's the first commandment, people took it as an order, as a commandment, but actually that was a divine gift, because the ability to love, even when you love a human being, brings joy. It calms you, it soothes you. But when you love God, then that feeling of joy is multiplied, is magnified exponentially. So once you learn to feel that love, it will replace and cast out any desires to get high. Let's look at the next panel, where we talk about individuals who have never been addicted. And that is important because if you've never been addicted, you have a lesson that you can teach people who have been addicted. Your strength and your ability to stay sober while everybody else is suffering from addiction. But I ask you, before you determine or consider yourself one of the select few, ask yourself a few questions. Are you really addicted? Do you get anxious or agitated when you can't have your coffee, tea, sugar, drink, dessert, alcohol? If you have an addiction, you first of all need to admit that you're addicted, because a lot of addicts are in denial. What is the most addictive substance on the planet? Sugar. And one of the most deadly and destructive. Okay? So when you are addressing the issue of addiction, it's important to really understand what is addiction. A lot of people talk about sex addiction, food addiction. Well, an addiction, you have to understand and define it correctly, or it trivializes addiction. Food is not addictive because food is essential and necessary. Addiction, first of all, has to start with something that's not necessary and that is deadly, and that something that you need to resist. However, food does contain addictive substances. Especially meat. If you eat a substance, meat or food with addictive chemicals, then it triggers addiction in you, triggers desire in you. Let's look at the next panel that talks about the 4 pillars of recovery. Although the way to freedom from addiction is an inner struggle, spiritual struggle, the goal is to change your conduct. Therefore, to be free from addiction, you must, what? Eat nutritiously. Be careful not to eat food with addictive chemicals in them. So eat nutritiously. Drink enough water. Smoke nothing. And I mean nothing. If you're smoking anything, you're wrong. So smoke nothing, everybody. There's nothing you can smoke or vape that's constructive, that's healthy. Next, love God with your all. And that's the spirituality aspect of it. And that requires a spiritual awakening. These are the 4 pillars of recovery. I want to thank Prestige for giving me an opportunity to just introduce people to the concept of spirituality when it comes to recovery, because without the spiritual component, certainly with a spiritual awakening, you're able to listen to and be guided by a higher power, the higher power of your understanding. Embrace divine love and you will rise to a higher level of spiritual awareness and gain the power to rescue other souls from the dreadful yoke of addiction. By being a loving crusader in this work, you will atone for your own failings and misdeeds. In closing, again, I want to thank Mr. Bonnet. I want to thank Will Smith and Prestige and all the other panelists. And I ask you all to join in this effort and join us at midnight, at 12 noon, and sunrise to express appreciation and love for God. And we welcome everybody to the family of the faithful. Thank you so very much.
Charles Moreline, thank you so much for sharing with us some guides, some spiritual guides and principles of recovery. You know, in AA, we talk about a higher power, and we ask folks who come into the rooms to acknowledge a higher power, identify a higher power. One thing I do know in my practice is those who practice their faith and are committed to spiritual discovery, they do well in recovery. One thing I know for sure is, you know, in treatment, we can give you all kinds of skills and strategies. We can give you that tool belt of recovery, you know, get a sponsor, get a home group, know your triggers, know your high risk situations. But I'm certain that anyone who's been in this struggle will encounter a situation or circumstance where none of that stuff is available immediately. And that's the time where you have to really pull on your spiritual equipment. You must have that relationship already intact and that understanding intact in order to push that button, because that's that emergency button. That's the button you push when nothing else works. Your sponsor won't pick up, you're away from your support system, and sometimes you have to pray yourself out of it. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You have to actually link up with your God of your understanding to help you overcome the situation and or the circumstance. And so we thank Charles Moreline. We know this is an important principle. We don't just subscribe to any particular faith, but it's the God of your understanding. I've been in the rooms long enough to realize that if you made it back to the rooms, you've already have God's grace. You've already had it. In spite of all that you've encountered and experienced and the pain that you received and or applied, God still has given you grace. So just imagine if you look back at him and connect with him, how much power you will have then. Because when we're in active addiction, our connection is kind of broken. And so we're asking people to reconnect, strengthen their faith, and be encouraged that and hopeful that through that process, healing can happen. Listen, I got to do a little announcement here. We are live streaming on Facebook. So I feel kind of special. A lot of folks are watching us. We are recording this presentation, and it will be available within the next 72 hours to be watched again. So thank you. Listen, Dr. Chapman, oh man, I'm excited. And when I got his bio, it took me about 45 minutes to read it because he has a distinguished career. He's definitely an expert in the field. But I'll give you a little piece just to show you how valuable he is to us in the recovery community. Dr. Edwin Chapman, MD, has practiced in Washington, D.C. for 40 years, specializing in internal medicine and addiction medicine. Over the past 40 years, he has investigated the complex mix of addiction, undertreated mental illness, infectious diseases such as AIDS and hepatitis C, criminal behavior, and chronic diseases, in which patients have 20 to 25 years shorter life expectancies. Dr. Chapman received his BS in 1969 and MD in 1973 from Howard University College of Medicine. He completed his internship and residency in internal medicine, as well as his fellowship in cardiology from the historic Freedman's and Howard University hospitals. He is board certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine and certified by the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And he is a fellow of the American Society of Addiction Medicine and a member of Alpha Honor Medical Society. Let me skip over about 20 more pages. I'm gonna go 20 pages forward and share with you. In the past several years, Dr. Chapman has been featured in the Washington Post. He's been featured in Addictions Professional Magazine. He's been a consultant with NPR. Ebony Magazine has done an article with him. Washington TV, WUSA. Oh man, the list just goes on and on. He's Practitioner of the Year. Indeed, I think you get a sense that Dr. Chapman has committed his entire career, professional career, to helping persons suffering from addiction and mental illness. So it's a pleasure and honor to introduce to all of you Dr. Edwin Chapman. Dr. Chapman?
Thank you. I want to share just a few slides, if I might, from my end, if that's possible. And I want to really kind of start from the beginning. I've been in Washington since 1964, undergrad at Howard University, and then medical school in 1969. And I'm going to be honest with you. In our training in medical school, and most doctors, there was absolutely nothing about addiction. Addiction was considered a moral weakness, and really that was around the time that methadone began being used to treat heroin addiction. So the last thing we wanted to see in the emergency room was somebody coming in on methadone. And that's really the background of our training. That radically changed, obviously, over the years. And if you don't grow in your profession, if you stay stagnant, then you never move forward. So about 20 years ago, I was approached by a friend who really was, we were at a time in the district that had just gone through financial crisis. Many of the clinics had closed, and there was the intent to open or reopen one of the methadone clinics. And a friend of mine was writing a grant for the United Planning Organization and asked me to participate as a medical director. And we really looked at the problem and really looked at the gravity of substance abuse in our community at that particular time. And at the same time, medicine had advanced somewhat in our understanding of brain function. We had by then CAT scans and really the advent of functional MRI scans. So we were really beginning to learn that there were structural changes in the brain that occur. And some of those changes are temporary and some are more permanent. But again, that we're looking at something that does have an organic basis. And so I became the medical director in 2000 of a methadone clinic. And I tell folks that I really didn't learn to practice medicine until then. When I sat in that clinic and listened to the stories, listened to the histories, listened to what had happened to individuals growing up or in their adult life, the stressors that had been imposed upon them, you really began to see what Mr. Moreland was talking about, the connection between the spirit, emotion, and physical health. So methadone clinics were generally set up only to treat one thing. Come in, you get the medicine, you get some counseling, and you leave. But there was no psychiatry, there was no internal medicine or regular checks on blood pressure, diabetes. So shortly after that, another medication came out called Buprenorphine, which is the second medicine to treat opioid addiction. I took the test, passed it, but I said, I'm not going to use this in my office. But it then dawned on me after someone approached me from the DC Superior Court, a senior parole officer wanted to institute a pilot demonstration project with buprenorphine. So in about 2005, patients would see their parole officer, they would see a psychologist, and then they would refer them to me to start buprenorphine. And I saw such dramatic results from that treatment with just about 5 patients at a time. In about 2010, I ended up with 100 patients. And right now I have about 265 patients. This is really the most intriguing and life-changing experience that one can have. I've seen folks go from bank robbers to mentors in the street. So I began to look back at really historically what happened to us. And you can't separate what happened to us in the past 401 years from what you see today. So I'm just going to show you just a few slides. And the first one is really talking about combating stigma, racism, classism, mental illness, and addiction. I gave a 2-hour lecture at Georgetown Law School, so I'm not going to go through all that. But one of the things I want you to really understand is our folks didn't start on drugs from the doctor's office. most of our patients, 95%, are suffering from emotional stress from this past 400 years. And we can walk through that through the slave trade, auctioning families off, separating families. So what we're seeing at the border, the Mexican border right now, is nothing new for America. That's what happened to us 400 years ago. Our families were not considered to be important. And so you could be separated from your mother and father from day one. Through that history, we are still separated in various ways: economic, job loss, education. So that history is pervasive, and it changes a little bit with each generation. Now you have the police shootings, et cetera. But that's just the latest iteration. You have President Trump and his conversation. So Trumpism is a form of mental stress. You wake up every morning wondering how you're going to survive. So knowing our pioneers, and I'm just going to touch on a few. And I met Dr. Melissa Freeman just 2 years ago in Shreveport, Louisiana. Believe it or not, she is now 94 years old. She still practices medicine in New York City. She's the first person to treat a pregnant woman with methadone, along with Vincent Dole and Marie Neislander. Nobody talked about her, but she was the pioneer that used methadone to get a woman on addicted to heroin through her pregnancy, and now that's pretty much the standard of care. So I met her 2 years ago. She's a member of the National Medical Association. She is the 2020 National Medical Association Practitioner of the Year. So knowing that history, and you have to hear her speak. You have to hear her tell her story. And I'll just try to paraphrase some of that conversation. But she said that what she saw was people suffering, and they would send them off to Hazleton at that time. And she said that by the time they got back to New York on the train, they had already relapsed. So her using methadone as a pioneer was a necessity at that particular time. So you have to have compassion, commitment, and competence. And this is when I met her in Shreveport. We were honored by the city. And to get back to Mr. Moreland, the event that we were attending was at a large church in Shreveport, Louisiana. And the pastor had the entire congregation, from children all the way up to adults, for the program that we presented. And I showed some of these slides and talked about treating opioid addiction. This is Dr. Benny Prim, who could call the first drug czar back in the 1970s. Again, a pioneer in the use of medication-assisted treatment, but he also integrated primary care and counseling, employment, all of that in his programs. And he died in 2005. Those programs, I think there's 6 locations in New York that have this integrated model, because he recognized the relationship between AIDS and hepatitis C in intravenous drug users in New York. And of course, here in Washington, D.C., everybody knows Ron Clark. And Ron Clark, again, recognized the fact that our people didn't know their history. And they didn't know that their history and adversity was related to their problem, that they were suffering from anxiety and depression, all related to racism and now what everybody is recognizing as the George Floyd syndrome. But we've lived through this. We just let other folks define us, and we accept it as a moral failing as opposed to what it really was. So now people are waking up. And of course, this is one of my teachers, Dr. Elise Galati, who just died several months ago, but she taught every medical student at Howard for the past 50 years. So this was a program that was put on by Taraji last year. And again, back to Mr. Moreland's point, really understanding that we have to get past the stigma. We have to get past the fact that we're blaming ourselves for something that we're not responsible for. These are some of the most esteemed psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers in the country. Dr. Newton, unfortunately, put together this particular program that I'm showing you, died a month ago. So pushing forward, SAMHSA recognized the importance of the Black church in treating substance abuse. It's in their literature. They even have a whole document on it that I can send to you. So we know that the faith community is critical in really understanding and solving our problems. This was a talk that I happened to give at Second Baptist Church last year, and saw this picture laying in the rectory and asked for a copy of it. And you see the pastor on the right-hand side holding the Bible, but you see these Union soldiers with their rifles. So our folks have always been willing to pray and fight at the same time. So you have to fight for right. So this is Reverend Frank Tucker. You probably recognize him, First Baptist Church of Washington. Been working with him for the past 15 years, initially on the AIDS epidemic, but more recently on health disparities in general. And this was a letter that he wrote last year talking about the opioid crisis in the District of Columbia. So the secret to quality care is back to Mr. Moreland, back to the lawyer, is love. It's simple. You have to love your people, and you have to love what you do. So Reverend Tucker has created a network of up to 70 churches in the Washington metropolitan area working on various health disparities. And it has grown, that program, Leadership Council for Health and Communities, has grown exponentially over the past several months. They're getting grants from everywhere, from CDC and others, dealing with not only COVID, but the AIDS crisis, registering people for insurance, anything that we need. So the base in our community is our churches. That's the one thing that nobody can take away from us. So we can turn to them for food services, clothing services, etc. This is a meeting. This is pre-COVID. We didn't know COVID was coming. This is a meeting that we actually had planning mental health and substance abuse, really dealing with the stress that was in our community. And this was back in January or February, I can't even remember exactly when it was, where we actually brought faith community and psychiatrists and medical and lay people together to plan this presentation that you're now seeing. This was a meeting that I had on July 1st of last year with Congressman Cummings. And again, we approached him. This was before the incident with the president where he talked about rats in Baltimore, to really talk to him about the importance of, we wanted to have a healing concert at a church in Baltimore, and we wanted him to participate. And he thought about it. He said he would get back to us. And I see Will smiling. Will was actually there to witness that event. And we put on 4 of those healing concerts, again, back to the church. So then the city actually put out a grant proposal with $1 million for up to 40 churches to get $25,000 a piece to put on similar similar programs in the District of Columbia, talking about the opioid epidemic. And so on the right-hand side, you see 4 of the types of programs that were suggested, including naloxone training in the churches. And this is the actual event in Baltimore that Congressman Cummings came, spoke. We actually have the videotape of his speech, and Will took quite a few pictures. These might be some of his pictures that we're seeing here. But the congressman, the last thing he said was that he was going to go to West Virginia because he represents all of the people. And of course, we know that he died about a month after this. So to really show you the commitment, that as sick as he was, he showed up that night. And I'll never forget that night. So I'm going to stop there and just basically say that we do use medication-assisted treatment. And we're now in a very different era from when I started medical school, and heroin was the opioid on the street. We now have fentanyl, which is a synthetic, which is 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin. And so we don't have the luxury of waiting to start somebody on medication. So really what we're looking for now is to be able to give that person an opportunity. We now have 3 medications. The third is called Vivitrol or naltrexone, which is an injectable that lasts a month, which is actually an antagonist. So each one of these medications works a little differently, but they can normalize that person at least physiologically. And then the process of really working on the mind, the spirit can begin. But many of our patients need to be on medication because a relapse will be fatal. We've seen, and there have been a number of studies now that show that if you're incarcerated for even a short period of time, your tolerance will go down and you come back out, and within the first 2 weeks of release, either from incarceration or from some residential treatment programs, that the propensity to overdose and die is 12.7 times the normal expected baseline. So medication-assisted treatment is now considered the standard of care. From my perspective, it's really malpractice not to offer it to a client. And now across the country, you're going to see lawsuits when folks are incarcerated and not offered medication or discharge or overdose and go to the emergency room and not started on medication-assisted treatment. And there is one case here in the district that's been filed that I know of. So unfortunately, the legal system may be the final partner that pushes the system in order to get our folks in treatment. And one last thing that I'll point out is that of the 3 medications, buprenorphine is probably the most widely and fastest growing. but only 2.7% of African Americans have access to buprenorphine. That was a study that the University of Michigan put out last year. So out of 13 million prescriptions, only about 360,000 went to African Americans. And the reason is the cost of the medicine. And if you look back historically, I actually went to some of the presentations by the pharmaceutical companies 14 years ago, and they were not encouraging us to use it in the urban setting because it's really a Schedule III drug, and they were afraid that it would hurt their market share and it would be sanctioned much like methadone and become a Schedule II drug. So what has happened, the way the insurance companies have gotten around that is they use what is called prior authorizations, and they make it difficult for patients to get the medication. We also, through Howard University, did a research study on about 150 of my patients looking at dosing, and we realized that because our patients were heroin addicts who were showing up now on fentanyl and still alive, that they probably genetically were what we call ultra rapid metabolizers and were able to tolerate these more potent drugs. So in order to treat them, we had to use higher doses of buprenorphine, which was not considered standard care at the time. And you know now that with these overdoses on the street, it sometimes takes 3 and 4 Narcan doses in order to resuscitate. Well, it's the same premise that you have patients who are really have a higher tolerance and need more medication to reverse that. So I'm going to stop there, and I can elaborate on more later on if there are questions.
Mr. Barnett, you wanted to make a comment?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I love and respect Dr. Chapman's work. He's one of the partners for Prestige, but more importantly, I just wanted to acknowledge, because he was recently asked to present at the next ASAM conference, the American Society of Addictive Medicine. And for an African-American doctor from our city to be a presenter at the ASAM conference is huge. And, you know, I wanted to recognize that as a milestone. A lot of the names that he brought up, I've been very fortunate to have met Dr. Prim, spoke with his daughter after Dick Gregory's funeral, got a chance to meet with Elijah Cummings because of Dr. Chapman. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that, you know, this man is jumping tall buildings with a single bound. We are lucky to have him in this community. I'm gonna turn it back over to Paul. Thank you, Dr. Chapman. Thank you, Dr. Moreland, for presenting so far. Paul, you back in the driver's seat, my brother.
Dr. Chapman, thank you so much for your service. I have a disclosure to make. I'm 150 years old. Yes, I am. I'm 150 years old. And like Dr. Chapman, I've been the beneficiary of clients sharing their stories and their struggles and their experiences. It's matured me. I have been the beneficiary of those stories, but it's matured me. And what I've realized through the years, as Dr. Chapman references, there are some core issues, lingering issues that if unaddressed, recovery will be very complicated and sometimes unsuccessful. I think back to when I was a director of an outpatient drug treatment program, and we were doing an orientation for a group of new enrollments. There was a client who was coming to us from US probation, federal US probation. And when I reviewed his packet, he was described as angry, hostile, impulsive, aggressive, all of these labels that would make you think this guy is going to be just too much to manage clinically. And when he presented for the orientation, I had 20 other clients in the room. He presented that way, very angry, very oppositional, very defiant. Oh man, he was loud, he was profane. He used some words, man, that I was like, oh boy, really? And he was hard to manage during the session. In fact, he was so disruptive, I stopped the session and characteristic of how I kind of do my service. I was like, hey man, what's going on with you? Yeah, what's going on? And he said something that really just moved me some 20 years later. And he said, Mr. Wells, I am angry today. And he admitted to it. And he said, last night, for the first time in my life, I met my father. Whoa, this is a 29-year-old African-American male. And he said, Mr. Wells, he lived right around the corner from the house that I grew up with. Whoa. And he went on to say that someone had notified him that his father lived around the corner. He went around the corner, knocked on the door. His father, who looked just like him, answered the door and rebuked him and said, you're not my son. I'd be angry too. What we discovered through the course of treatment is this young man suffered with abandonment issues that were crippling him. And it had to be understood, it had to be acknowledged, and had to be processed and reconciled before he could move on. And in fact, he was just medicating to that sense of low self-esteem, inadequacy, the core issues. At the Reentry and Sanction Center, where I was deputy director, we had the benefit of working with the offenders, reentrants, for 28 days and really looking at those histories. And you know, I'm a social scientist by training, but I don't believe in luck and chance. I do know that there's a deliberate course of life and there's some divine intervention there. But when you really sit down and spend that much time looking at psychological assessments and the instruments and the findings and psychiatric profiles, I almost say to yourself, I would expect you to be here. The levels of trauma, the levels of untreated mental health like depression and anxiety. And I'm not going to talk about the other staples of stability like housing, employment, financial literacy. Oh my goodness. And literacy just by itself, being able to operationalize and navigate life. So recovery in itself is a complex process that requires skill and strategic interventions to help a client move through to reach a thing of recovery. Listen, I'm excited to introduce my next guest, and I was thinking, how would I introduce him? Well, I introduced him by a client that used to share in a group I facilitated. And every time he would introduce himself, he says, hey, my name is Bob, and every time I use, I break out in handcuffs. Wow. Every time I use, I break out in handcuffs. And it's the handcuffs that saved my life. Handcuffs saved my life. And so practicing mandated treatment for 20 years, I do know the value of mandated care. In fact, I don't know, throughout the years, and I might have treated hundreds of thousands of clients, I've never treated someone who voluntarily walked in the door. Let me give you some examples. The judge pushed them in the room, or the wife said, I'm going to leave them. You better get in there. Or the doctor says, I'm going to take your kidney out. You better stop drinking. So there's always an external force that pushes you in the room. And in this instance, we have an expert who's learned how to massage and navigate and balance the force of mandated treatment with helping the client determine and identify for themselves that I want this way of life. So Dwight Jones, man, I've worked with Dwight Jones almost 11 years and been an associate of him for many more. He's currently employed as a federal government agency as a senior lead mental health counselor at a 28-day residential treatment program. I'll say it, Reentry and Sanction Center, for post-incarcerated individuals on supervision, probation, and court defendants. Mr. Jones currently acknowledges 20 years of recovery in 12-step programming, which was preceded by Treatment Salvation Army, Harmless Lights program, while also participating in the VA's hospital's outpatient SHARP program. Listen to this. In 2015, he graduated from the Lincoln University with honors. I said it, honors, and a master's degree in human services with a concentration in counseling. In his professional career, he has become a certified counselor, completed competencies in co-occurring disorders, and has extensive training in HIV testing and counseling. Mr. Jones was primarily educated in DC public schools, and he served in the United States Army. As an employee of Family Medical Counseling Services, he has worked in halfway houses throughout the city. He's worked in DC jail, the Correction Corporation of America following facility providing HIV education and counseling to inmates. Mr. Jones has worked with various community-based organizations in the field of substance abuse, HIV education, HIV testing, and counseling. He has provided therapeutic services to juveniles of this city. He has worked and served as a board member on the DC Government HIV Prevention Planning Committee, the executive board member of the Ryan White Planning Council, and the Project Ujima Prison Project. With honor and respect, I'd like to introduce and welcome to the discussion, Mr. Dwight Jones. Dr. Jones, your mic is on. I mean, yes.
How's everyone doing? I thank you, Mr. Wells. I am honored to be a panelist with these esteemed members. Several of them I've worked with. Several of them have watched me in the recovery process from the very beginning at Harbor Light. And Mr. Moreland spoke about the spiritual aspect of recovery. And so in the 12-step process, we talk about filling that void. And that void is when we speak about is putting something else in to replace all of those things that we didn't like about ourselves. We didn't like the things that we did to our community, the things that we did to our families. And that void was filled by me through my higher power, which I refer to as the creator. And there have been several every day, all day, throughout the day. I rely on that higher power. Recovery is a day-to-day process. And sometimes it turns into a hour-by-hour process. Sometimes it even turns into a minute-by-minute process. And when I say that, I think about medications. And I've had, from 2000 when I entered into treatment at Harbor Lights, and Mr. Barnett was a counselor at Harbor Lights. It was actually Mr. Barnett that got me into the field of counseling because I saw him doing something that it appeared to me that he enjoyed. He injected a lot of humor. So people took to that. And I particularly took to that. And I said, that's what I want to do right there. I want to be able to help people because I come from a helping family. My mother was a nurse. And so I come from that foundation. And I said to myself, that's what I want to do, because look like this guy is having a tremendous amount of fun. And most of all, he's getting paid. So I felt like that that's something that I can do. So in maybe 2001 or 2002, I entered into a CAC class. And from there, I achieved my CAC, and while working at Family Medical Counseling Service, and I had the honor of sitting down and talking to Dr. Prim at an HIV convention in San Francisco. And I felt that a lowly soul like me had the opportunity to sit down and talk with such an esteemed gentleman in the field of HIV. And that kind of propelled me also. Then there was this other gentleman, and I know he wouldn't mind me mentioning his name. His name is Chris Miles. And Chris told me one day, I said, Chris, I need to break off into this field. I need my name to be known. He said, Dwight, no, you don't. He said, you don't need to meet people. People need to meet you because you have something to offer. And I have carried that with me since that day. And so the recovery process has been, it has allowed me to become the esteemed gentleman that I am today. It has allowed me that 4 years into my recovery, someone shared at one of my anniversaries, and they said that this is a guy that has integrity. And at that time, I didn't look at myself in that way because I was still fresh into recovery. I was still thinking about all of the baggage and all of the things that I had done. I hadn't yet grown to love myself. I had just grown to like myself. And in the process of recovery, they say that we'll teach you to learn to love yourself. Well, I kind of turned that around because I didn't like me when I came in. When I had the opportunity to sit down and review the things and the things that I did, not only to me, but the things that I had done to my family and the things that I had done to my community, I didn't like me. I did not like me, let alone talk about loving me. I didn't like me. So I had to do the thing about liking me first before I could love me. So at that time, 4 years in, I wasn't into loving Dwight. I was just learning how to like Dwight. I was just getting over the things that I had did to my mother, the things that I did to my brothers and sisters, and they kind of weighed heavy on me. And it was Mr. Barnett that shared at my anniversary, that said that I was a person of integrity. And I started looking around the room because I wanted to know who this guy was talking about, because he couldn't be applying a word such as integrity to me. And as the years went on, I did learn to love myself. And in loving myself, I started eating better. I started treating myself better, because what I know is that people are going to treat me like I treat me. I cannot expect for anyone to treat me better than I treat me. So if I treated me with a certain amount of respect, then I felt as though people would treat me with a certain amount of respect. So as the years went on, in the process of recovery, I started demonstrating what this 12-step programming is about. And 12-step programming it's a very personal, intimate process. It first teaches you about you, and then it teaches you how to take you out into the community so you can possibly help other people. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a clinical factor. It can be in any other factor, but it teaches you how to learn about you, because first I had to learn about me before I could share myself with anyone else. And so I started to embark on knowing who Dwight was. And through that process, I was able to take that out into the community. That's how I started working at Family and Medical Counseling Service. And that's how I started working at the Reentry and Sanction Center. And I've been working at the Reentry and Sanction Center since 2006. And I'm talking about a guy that last incarceration was in 1999. I am one of those people that Mr. Wells spoke about that was mandated to Harbor Lights. And the parole officer told me, if you do not complete Harbor Lights, you will return back to jail. And even though I'd spent in 1999, it was only a one-night stay, but that morning when I was released, and I remember it like it was yesterday, I was walking up 5th Street from the courthouse, and I didn't have, they took my belt, they took my shoestrings, and I thought that everyone that drove by me knew that I was just being released. And that's what stuck with me and said that, Dwight, this is your last incarceration. Because I spent most of the 80s incarcerated. And I mean, I would go in for 2, come out, stay 6 months. I would go in for 3, come out, stay 6 months. I would be mandated to the halfway house. And I would get there. I remember one time I got there on a Thursday, and on Saturday I was back down Aquan. And so I had to break that cycle. That was one of the things that I had to break the incarceration cycle. And I broke the incarceration cycle by listening to what other people had to say, because I knew that my thinking had gotten me into all of these things all of these negative environments that I had been into. And even though I am somewhat intelligent person, but I know that all the time my thinking is not my best friend. So sometimes I have to run my thinking by somebody. Even with 20 years in recovery, I have to run my thinking by other people to check and see, is this the right thing that I am thinking about? And that is before I embark on doing something, not after. Because I need to ask them oftentimes, well, how does this sound? And I have a best friend that I generally run things by. And my best friend happens to be a female. And so it is such an honor and such a joy for me to sit and say that I've just recently celebrated 20 years in recovery, and in the same year, I turned 64 years old. So I was in a meeting last night, and the name of the meeting was Aging in Recovery. And so, we were talking about illnesses, and so from 2000 to 2015, and I graduated from Lincoln in 2015. And in 2016, Mr. Wells chased me out of the building. He called me down to his office, and he said, Mr. Jones, I want you out of my building. And he was looking out for me because I could not look out for me. I didn't see what other people saw. And my kidneys were failing. I came into recovery with a kidney transplant. So that transplant started to fail in 2016. And actually I was gone away for an entire year, almost a year to the date. I left the building, I believe, in the first week of June, and I didn't return back until May 28th of 2017. And when I came back, I was on dialysis. And I am here to tell you that the Creator blessed me this year in February with my second transplant. So when people say that someone may die so others can live, I take that very, very personal, because I understand the ramifications of what I did to me. And I understand that the Creator has given me a second chance at life, you know, because I pretty much squandered for 32 years what he had given me prior to. And I am trying to make the best out of this life that he has now granted me with. I enjoy the work that I do. I work with co-occurring disorder men that are recently released from prison and or are sanctioned from the community. And I wouldn't do anything else. I would not do anything else. And like Mr. Wells said, we have a client now. I have a client now, even in this COVID, I have a client now that has multiple traumas. And some of the traumas that I see in clients and I've seen in clients, it's enough to pop the top of your head off. I remember there was a guy sitting at my desk and he had never disclosed that he had been molested. And so, and like Mr. Wells said, this guy had been using to this all of these years because it was something that he had been suppressing. He had been suppressing and using all of these years. And he was able to sit at my desk and reveal that this is what I've been using to, Mr. Jones. And so he gave it to me. He gave it to me to do what I could with it. And so at that time, I gave it to my team members because I had to give it to someone else because part of me being the clinician in me know that there's something I can't help and can't handle all situations. And so I passed it on to the psychologist. And the psychologist was able to help this guy. And I saw him about 2 months ago. And he is working in the community with reentries, with returning citizens. And so when I see those kind of things, those are the kind of things that make me feel good about the work that I do, because it was passed on to me from Mr. Barnett, from Will. It was passed on to me, and it is my job, not only as a clinician, but also as a person in recovery, to pass that on to the next person. I've also worked, which was mentioned, in the HIV field. I've been working in the HIV field since 2002. I've been working in the HIV field for 2002. I'm a HIV tester and counselor, and gratifying work. I've had the opportunity to return back to DC jail, which was, in the beginning, was not a very good experience, because when the doors shut, you know, you get that cold chill, you know, because I'm going to the staff interest now. I'm going into, let me say that again, because I need to hear me say that. I am going into the DC jail through the staff entries. I am no longer going in the back of the building on a bus, handcuffed, shackles on my feet with a chain that's connected from my hands to my feet. I'm talking about the process of recovery and some of the gifts that it will give you, some of the gifts that it gave me. And no longer was I referred to 216-598, but I was referred to as Mr. Jones. And some of the faces of some of the correctional officers that was there when I was 216-598, now I am a contractor entering into the jail. The look on their faces, some of them have a look of disgust, but many of them, and most of them, had a look of enjoyment, of praise, to see that where I came from to where I am. And so, you know, it's recovery has been a great, wonderful, magnificent, and all the other adjectives that one could add to this thing. The only regret is that my mother did not get a chance to see me in this process. However, my sister has had the opportunity, and I've did some terrible things to her. You know, and we sat around in the summer, and we were able to laugh and smile at some of the things that I did to her. And so she said, Dwight, you'll have 20 years in this process. You have 20 years in recovery. You've been clean 20 years. You know, she was able to acknowledge that I'd been clean 20 years. And so COVID took my celebration away. However, I am still wonderful. It is still wonderful. It's a wonderful process. I thank you all for allowing me to be a panelist. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones, thank you so much for sharing. I may not be what I want to be, but I'm sure not what I used to be. I'm no longer 261-598. I am a practitioner of health, helping those in recovery. Ms. Jones, I'm so glad you went to a meeting last night. It seems like you're serious about recovery and you understand the importance of maintaining your good mental health. I asked the practitioners out there, have you seen your therapist lately? Every good therapist should have a therapist. Every good spiritual advisor should have a spiritual advisor. Our state of health is important when we talk about strategies and helping people recovery. What is your state of health? We all have a story, don't we? And for most of us, we have to reconcile some parts of that story in order to deliver health and healing to others. Mr. Jones, I just commend you for your service. And you're one of those practitioners that although you have your own recovery experience, I've seen you practice counseling. And you're one of those counselors who don't always refer to your own recovery experience. So I like the fact that you got training and you developed the competencies and that you can provide service without always telling your story. So thank you for that. Again, practitioners, schedule an appointment with your therapist. Make sure your state of health is good. Oh boy, Leslie Cooper, Esquire, the magnificent extraordinary. I'm so honored and so delighted to see her and to introduce her. I've worked closely with her at CSOSA in that she was in an executive position and really helped us cultivate and implement the Reentry and Sanction Center, which I think still today is one of the best, if not the best, model of assessment for high-risk offenders. But let me tell you about Leslie Cooper. Leslie Cooper currently serves as the Director of Pretrial Services Agents for the District of Columbia, PSA, a federal law enforcement agency. Now listen to this, as the youngest and the first ever African-American to hold this position. Oh my goodness. Let me just say that again. As the youngest and first ever African-American to hold this position, she provides oversight for one of the nation's premier pretrial organizations. Her federal career spans over 20 years, highlighted by her appointment to the Senior Executive Service in 2011. During that time, she served in senior level positions with Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency, where she helped the organization achieve certification as an independent federal agency. In the U.S. Department of Labor, where she was instrumental in finalizing a series of regulations implementing the Patient Protection and Affordable Health Care Act, known as Obamacare. Throughout her career, Leslie has been responsible for a variety of administrative and operational functions and spearheaded efforts to make organizations evidence-based and data-driven. Recent examples of her work include directing an independent evaluation of racial bias in the risk assessment tool used by PSA, revising case management protocols to ensure the use of the least restrictive interventions for pretrial defendants. I like that, least restrictive. And introduced an independent data validation and integrity program. In addition to her full-time position, I don't know what she has time for anything else. She also serves as the co-chair of the District of Columbia Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and a member of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management Standing Qualifications Review Board. Let me tell you this, Leslie received her Bachelor of Science degree from Howard University and her Juris Doctorate from the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. Impressive. She is the member of the Bar Associations of Maryland and the District of Columbia, and a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Leslie is a wife, and I guess the best accomplishment for her is she is the mother of an adult son. So it's with honor and privilege I introduce to you Dr. Leslie Cooper.
My goodness, I don't even know what to say after that, but I will just say to all, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here to participate in this very important discussion around the various pathways to recovery. I want to first thank Prestige and specifically Will Bonnet for inviting me to be a part of this very distinguished panel. I have the tough task of speaking after all these amazing speakers have shared, and so I hope that I will hold up my end of the bargain. I'm really delighted to see my former colleagues and still friends, Dwight Jones and Paul Wells, again, because I have spent a number of years alongside Will and Paul and Dwight, really in this field, working on issues related to addiction and criminal justice, two topics that are very near and dear to my heart. And before I get into what I came to talk about today, I just want to say to Dwight that yes, COVID-19 canceled the celebration, but it did not cancel the achievement that comes along with that milestone. So even though we can't be there to hug and love on you, we are still celebrating virtually because we understand the significance of that milestone. And so we congratulate you for that. And I'm very happy to hear that. As Paul so very eloquently said, I've really spent the majority of my career working in this field, beginning many years ago with my internship with ADASA turned APRA. And then as Paul indicated, I was with CSOSA for about 10 and a half years. And I'm now nearly another 10 years in with pretrial, where I'm continuing to try to look at the connection between addiction and criminality and figuring out how we can break that cycle and break that connection. It's from these experiences that I know firsthand that the criminal justice system can be a very viable pathway for helping individuals recover, right, and to lead sober lives. And while much of what I say today will focus on the very important role that the criminal justice system can and does play in ushering people into the world of recovery, I have to start with a foundational statement of my belief, which is that while the criminal justice system can help people recover, I don't think that it should have to be the only way that people have access to care and treatment. My hope is that one day we have a world where governments are resourced in such a way that treatment and recovery services can be offered on demand in a voluntary manner without the additional burdens that come along with arrest and, for so many of us, conviction. But because that is not the world that we live in just yet today, we will continue to play our roles as treatment providers in the justice system. And that's what I'm going to spend a few moments talking to you about this afternoon. First slide, please. That's good. If you just scroll, I'm good. I can follow. So a significant number of the individuals who enter our justice system have substance abuse issues. And within the pretrial space, we really have two main jobs, and they're listed here. We're supposed to help defendants remain arrest-free. We're supposed to help defendants make all scheduled court appearances. So really, we do all of this while someone is awaiting trial. Next slide, please. We do this by conducting a risk assessment, which includes an examination of current and prior drug use. And after we assess that risk, what we do is we recommend release conditions. So in my introduction, Paul talked about us recommending the least restrictive conditions that are necessary to make sure that people get back to court and remain arrest-free. For those individuals who are released to the community while awaiting trial, we provide supervision, and when necessary, we provide treatment to help promote pretrial compliance and to reduce their risk of failing to appear and risk of getting rearrested. Our process is very similar to the process that is used by CSOSA. It's just that we work with people pre-trial versus CSOSA that works with the population that has already gone through the trial process and has been convicted and is now serving a sentence of community supervision. So some of you may be asking why drug testing is a part of our risk assessment. It's because research shows us that for adults arrested and awaiting trial in DC Superior Court, drug use is a determining factor in predicting whether they will be able to remain arrest-free and make every scheduled court appearance. Defendants who are actively addicted, it stands to reason, right, that they tend to have poorer outcomes, both in terms of rearrest and failure to appear. The same holds true on the CSOSA side. Offenders with untreated substance abuse issues tend to have greater difficulty complying with supervision requirements. So for this reason, it becomes very important that we identify persons in need of treatment early and that we offer opportunities to address their addiction. And in doing so, we achieve a twofold mission of improving public safety, but also improving public health. And I want to pause just for a moment and focus on something that I think makes pretrial and CSOSA here in the district different than pretrial probation and parole programs across the nation. We do drug testing in order to connect someone with an opportunity for treatment. There are jurisdictions across the country where drug testing in and of itself is used as a supervision tool. And when you keep failing a drug test, you can land back in jail just for failing the test, even when you have not been offered that opportunity for treatment. So one of the things that I think makes both pretrial and CSOSA model programs in this regard is that we drug test to identify need. We then assess and find out what the treatment need is, and we make efforts to connect individuals with that opportunity. So let's take a look at what we see. Each year we have between 9,000 and 10,000 defendants that we process through our lockup, right? And of that number, just under 30% of them are testing positive for drugs at lockup. Now, keep in mind that this lockup test does not include marijuana. Otherwise, you would obviously see those numbers be slightly higher. But we don't include marijuana for two specific reasons. The first one is because our research has shown us that here in the district, the use of marijuana alone does not necessarily change the risk level for someone's failure to appear or to get rearrested during the pretrial period. So marijuana alone does not drive risky behavior. The second reason is because of recent legislative changes in the district that have to do with the use of marijuana. We do include in our testing panel synthetic drugs. We heard earlier on the panel the talk about the introduction of fentanyl, right? So this transition from heroin to fentanyl. So we do include synthetic drugs in our testing panel. And within our forensic toxicology lab, we're continuing to do exploratory research to identify what is being used by this adult criminal justice population that we might need to be ready to respond to. So knowing that about 27% of our population might be in need of treatment, we work very hard to properly assess and, where appropriate, refer individuals to a continuum of care with an individualized treatment plan. So I love whoever's doing the slides because they're following me perfectly and they're moving as I'm talking. So thank you to whoever's behind the scenes doing that. I appreciate you. So our current continuum of care is here. We heard Mr. Jones and Mr. Wells talk about the Reentry and Sanctions Center. Those would be actually before this arrow because we do benefit from being able to send defendants to that treatment readiness programming. But then in addition to that, we also have the availability for detoxification, residential, transitional housing, and intensive outpatient services. We work very closely with the vendors that provide these services to monitor really the quality and to ensure that universal clinical protocols are being adhered to in the delivery of this treatment. As I stated earlier, treatment provided in the criminal justice system is designed only to mitigate risk, right? If you happen to get better, that's great and we'll take all credit for it. But it is really designed to mitigate that risk of either reoffending or the risk of failing to appear in court. And because we are not funded to serve everyone that is in need, you'll notice that our treatment continuum only goes from detox to intensive outpatient. We are not adequately resourced to serve individuals who only need outpatient care. And so for those individuals, we will refer them to local or community-based resources, including those that are funded by the DC Department of Behavioral Health. So by connecting individuals to treatment, we increase the likelihood that they will remain drug-free and hopefully as a result remain arrest-free and make all scheduled court appearances. Currently within the district, right around 90% of all defendants make every scheduled court appearance and remain arrest-free while awaiting trial. You see the actual figures here. It's 88% for our arrest-free rate. It's 91% for our court appearance rate. And I will note that of those individuals who are rearrested while awaiting trial, fewer than 2% are rearrested on a dangerous or violent crime. And we believe one of the reasons why we're able to get to these very good outcomes is because we're providing treatment as a risk mitigation factor. So now let's take a look at why we believe the criminal justice system to be an effective pathway to treatment success. Next slide, please. There are a few leading theories on why criminal justice treatment works. And this afternoon, I'm going to quickly hit 3 of them, which I think are probably the 3 most common that you hear talked about. So we're going to talk a little bit about leverage. We'll talk about integrated case planning, and we're going to talk about something called contingency management. So let's first take a look at leverage. Next slide, please. The first reason that the criminal justice system has been and continues to be really effective in helping people achieve sobriety is the obvious leverage involved in the process, right? So the most basic definition of leverage is to use something for maximum advantage. And while none of us would describe being arrested or placed onto probation, parole, or supervised release as a good thing, an arrest and or conviction can nonetheless be leveraged and turned into a good thing. So another way of looking at this is that you can turn a perceived problem into an opportunity. So when we talk about leverage really in this context, we mean using the threat of any pending criminal process to encourage treatment participation. So individuals in the pretrial stage have that threat of those pending charges hanging over their heads, right? So for most of us, just knowing that we will be back in front of the judge within the next few months is enough to make us do whatever is going to be asked of us, including participating in treatment, especially if the charge is a serious one that carries a long possible sentence. If a defendant goes to trial and is found guilty, when a judge is permitted to do so, they will often take into consideration that defendant's level of compliance during the pretrial period, including whether or not they participated in any mandated or voluntary treatment programs when deciding upon an appropriate sentence. So again, the leverage of pending charges is one of the ways that we see this manifest. Now, for people who have already been convicted and sentenced to a term of probation or supervised release, there is often that very real possibility of incarceration or for some reincarceration for noncompliance with release conditions. And if someone has a release condition to participate in treatment, depending upon the release conditions that were ordered, the supervision officer may be able to go back in front of that judge and ask for revocation due to noncompliance. And you just heard Mr. Jones say he would much rather be walking in through the staff entrance than through the back door. And so I think for very many of us, if given that option to remain in the community or go to DC jail, we're going to pick treatment for 500, Alex. We're going to say, send me to treatment. I will try it, even if I really don't want to go. So revocation means that this community supervision period ends and the person is sent to jail for a period of time. Sometimes it can be all of the remaining time on their sentence. In other cases, but always at a minimum, it is until they can be seen by a judge. So when given those 2 options, treatment usually seems like the better option. For these reasons, hang tight one sec for me, driver, go back, thank you. For these reasons, many pretrial defendants or post-conviction offenders agree to participate in treatment because they understand that is going to be their better option. So in nearly every other setting, we really view this type of forced compliance as a negative thing. But the good news is that in the criminal justice system, it's actually a good thing. A 2018 National Institute on Drug Abuse study found that treatment does not need to be voluntary for it to work. It can actually be equally as effective as a voluntary treatment stint, right? So when you think about whether someone being forced to do something will impact their outcome, the good news here is that when it comes to the criminal justice system and treatment, that is not the case. If you visit various recovery circles and support circles, and as Mr. Wells said, you often hear people saying, thank you to the judge that locked me up. Thank you to the police officers who arrested me, because I was not going to stop until something on the outside caused me to rethink the way I was doing things on the inside. And so we know that leverage can be a very powerful tool that makes treatment in the criminal justice system effective. Next slide, please. The second reason that treatment tends to work in the criminal justice system is what we call integrated case planning or integrated treatment planning. So one aspect of this benefit is that the individual gets ready access to care. What this essentially means in the pretrial context is that you're not on pretrial supervision for that long. So that means relatively soon after you're placed onto supervision, we're going to be able to quickly coordinate care and make available to you a clinically appropriate treatment placement. This expedited access can be a huge benefit to the person who is struggling and might otherwise decide not to participate if the wait time becomes too long. So again, the direct access and the more readily accessible access to treatment is helpful in the coordination of care here. A second aspect of integrated case planning is the ability to simultaneously address multiple issues at one time, right? So when we talk about the integration of criminal justice and treatment requirements, each person that enters the treatment programs, either through CSOSA or through pretrial, has an individualized treatment plan. And what we're able to do in those plans is we're able to set goals and objectives that are designed to help someone be successful, both in their recovery, but then also as it relates to their involvement in the justice system. So being able to integrate all of those goals and objectives into a single composite plan increases the likelihood that someone's going to be able to buy into that plan for his or her life and stick to it and achieve those goals that we've established. And I think the final piece around integrated case planning that you see in the justice system is you really get the benefit of dual case management services, right? So you have your community supervision officer who is working alongside your treatment case manager to implement that dual case plan that we talked about. We all know that when it comes to helping out with something, two people are usually better than one. Within pretrial, we employ specially trained and in some cases certified and or licensed certified staff who are skilled in addiction recovery. So this additional training and licensure sensitizes them to the complex issues that come along with addiction and equips them to really work closely with treatment providers to map out a plan that creates the best opportunity for success. In 2014, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, published a report explaining the importance of this integrated case planning and cited it as one of the reasons why criminal justice treatment tends to be more effective. Again, having those two trained professionals, a treatment professional and a criminal justice professional working together to promote treatment success. Next slide, please. That same 2014 SAMHSA study that I referenced earlier also found that criminal justice treatment is effective because it uses contingency management. So contingency management is merely a fancy way of saying that the system uses sanctions and incentives to help foster and promote recovery from addiction. Within the justice system, we use what are called graduated sanctions, meaning that we start at the lowest possible level to intervene, and then we only graduate up to progressively more intense sanctions if the non-compliant behavior is not stopped. Likewise, we will begin to incentivize or reward good behavior at a lower level, and when we see it sustained for periods of time, we will continue to increase. One of the best examples of an incentive that we use within DC's pretrial system is the drug court, right? So successful drug court graduates can have their misdemeanor cases dismissed or they can have felony cases reduced to misdemeanors or treated more favorably at sentencing. For our non-drug court participants, successful treatment completion can result in reduction or removal of supervision requirements, including how often you have to come see your pretrial services officer and any drug testing that you may be required to participate in. However, on the other end of the spectrum, we also have the ability to increase the intensity of most release conditions for non-compliance, right? So this can include more frequent reporting to a supervision officer, more frequent drug testing, and even installation of a GPS device when that is determined to be the appropriate response to the behavior that we're seeing. As a last resort, we can ask for revocation of supervision if there is sustained non-compliance that we're not able to address through our clinical or criminal justice interventions. For some people, when the revocation is related to drug use, we may coordinate what is called a bed-to-bed transfer. And that simply means that we will have someone removed from the community, put into the DC jail for a very short period of time while we arrange a direct entry into a residential treatment program. And so for some of us, that very short incarceration is going to be just the break that we need to get our minds right to enter the treatment process. But it also then prevents what one of the panelists before me said, which is when you get out, when you've been out of your using environment and then you go to use again, you find that your tolerance level is very different. So when we do have to do revocation, we try to pair it with that bed-to-bed transfer so that we can have that seamless coordinated continuum of care. And we find that that helps jumpstart our recovery process. That was my last slide. So now we've covered the three of the primary reasons why the criminal justice system can put someone on the pathway to recovery. So in sum, yes, the justice system can be an effective provider. And while we do not aim to be your provider of choice, we are happy when we get someone to sobriety by whatever means necessary. So thank you again for having me this afternoon. I look forward to answering any questions and participating in the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Director Cooper. We appreciate the model that you demonstrated for us. We appreciate your service to the district. We're going to open the discussion up and you can ask questions through the chat. But while we're receiving the questions, I'd like our panelists to maybe comment on something that they've heard so far. Maybe take a minute or so if there's something that you'd like to kind of follow up with just before we start responding to questions. So Mr. Moreland, Mr. Jones, Dr. Chapman, if you have any final comments, this would be a great time for that. Okay.
I could start off, and I just hearing Mr. Jones's story. I read the Washington Post columns on George Floyd. And as you know, his story is every Black man's story to a certain extent. And he too was addicted to drugs, opiates, and on and off treatment, and struggled to really connect and really talked about a program in Milwaukee that was very much like what Mr. Moreland was talking about, the spiritual connection. But we know that in our community, unfortunately, that only 5% of practitioners are physicians, only 6% are nurses, 4% psychologists, 2% psychiatrists. So we really have a manpower shortage to begin with. And now with the issues with COVID, we know that as the months go by, more and more people are going to be struggling with mental health issues, substance abuse issues. So it's really going to be incumbent upon us to build around that model that Mr. Moreland was talking about, connecting with community-based organizations like the churches to really anticipate this. I'm the kind of person that feels, you have to be proactive rather than reactive. we know what's down the road. We know what to expect. And we really need to use this opportunity to prepare for that. And I would just like to introduce another program that I've been working with in Washington called the Black Coalition Against COVID. And if I use the name Reed Tuckson, then when people shake their heads, and that means they've been around a while. So Reed Tuckson, as you know, was a former commissioner of health in the District of Columbia. And he's been working, of course, he's on the board of trustees of Howard University, but he's been working with community-based organizations, starting with the churches, medical practitioners, returning citizens, hip hop. And I want people to really start seriously thinking about after November 3rd, after we get what we need in that regard, that we really start thinking about what kind of person and who do we need as Secretary of Health, because that is going to be critical in terms going forward. We need somebody that can reach down to the masses and reach up to the highest folks in power and connect the two. We don't need a top-down approach. And I think we really need to really start pushing to get the right person, because healthcare and mental health is going to be critical to our survival. And we can do it, but we're really going to have to bring all of these forces together in order to make that happen. So that's one thing I want you to think about. We are going to have a webinar this evening, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Ambrose Lane will be on there. Dr. Alvin Ponder from New York, and Reed Tuckson will be the moderator. But I think, if you listen to that conversation, it's called Black Men For, and I don't want to mess up Prestige's nonprofit status, I'm assuming, but we are talking about our future. So I want you to listen to that. This is very important.
I'm happy to follow that up, Dr. Chapman, with you. As you know, our paths have crossed over the years, and we do have a mission, and I appreciate that everybody on this panel acknowledges the importance of spirituality. In fact, an increasing number of health professionals who provide care for patients suffering from substance abuse disorders now understand that recovery requires more than treating the mind and body. There's growing recognition of the need to pay more attention to the addicted person's spiritual well-being. And Mr. Jones, you are evidence and living proof of that, as am I. All the external factors, including the type and strength of substances, are secondary to spirituality. So when you think about addiction from the perspective of spirituality, it is evident that the inability to achieve fulfillment on the spiritual plane drives substance abuse disorder. The psychological and behavioral and biological manifestations, on the other hand, are merely symptoms. Again, it is with great anticipation and hope in the well-being of our community that I want to commend and congratulate Paul Wells and Will Barnett and you, Ms. Cooper, Mr. Chapman, and especially you, Dwight Jones. Let me just say for 1 second, you are chosen, you are special. It is the nature of addiction that addiction causes you to realize that there is a separation between the spiritual self and the biological self. So it causes an awakening. You have been chosen. I anticipate working with all of you. We have a mission, we have a goal, we have a job. There is work to do. And I want to thank everybody, and I'm honored to be with you all today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moreline. We're honored to be with you in partnership. I see some questions have come in, and we have one question for Director Cooper. I'm not sure if you all can see them, but I'll read it out loud. Director Cooper, I know that you perform your work through the justice system, but how dedicated are the courts to provide the level of care and attention to those consumers? Or is the court just putting Band-Aids on and superficially providing services to a series of critical issues? Director Cooper, were you able to understand my?
Yeah, I do. So Mr. Vines, I believe it is. So thank you for that question. I think it's a really good question. It is in some ways asking me to speak on behalf of a partner. So I'm going to speak from the experience that I've had with the court, right? So in my experience, the courts have demonstrated a commitment really to ensuring access to care. Understanding that the courts don't control, right, the availability of resources within the district. You may be able to look back and see that judges recently have even called leadership of some of our behavioral health services in to really hold them accountable for making available services that we believe are necessary to support the justice-involved population. I had a recent discussion with the new chief judge in DC Superior Court, and she definitely expressed her commitment to the behavioral health community and figuring out ways that we can make this a much more streamlined and seamless process for individuals who do find themselves involved in the justice system who also have an addiction issue. In fact, during the pandemic, one of the dockets that we're working hardest to get back up and operating is drug court. We've actually been in a series of meetings for the last couple of months, figuring out how we can safely reintroduce that aspect of court programming to a population that's greatly in need. So again, understanding that I can't answer specifically on behalf of the court, I do think from the seat in which I sit, it does seem as though we have a very willing partner in the court to tackle these really tough issues.
Thank you, Director Cooper. With regret, we have to conclude or move towards conclusion of this symposium. It's been a wonderful experience, and I think it's going to generate more interest and enthusiasm, possibly for a part 2. There's so much territory to discuss and process and understand. And collectively, we can really put our great minds together and create a model that's going to be impactful, not just to the community, but to our families and to us directly. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I need to turn this back to Mr. Wilhelm Bonnet for closing remarks.
My cup runneth over. In other words, I have to tell you, the work that we do, not just at Prestige, but there is a mutuality of purpose amongst the participants and amongst many of the people who are attendees as well. And the mutuality of purpose is we really want the best for our community. We want the best for the people that we serve. We don't want people to suffer needlessly behind things that we can change and things that we can control. This is an election year. I suggest that everybody get out and vote. Use your vote wisely. But more importantly, we're elders now. When I first got into this field, when I first got clean, it was 1986. And I was a mess, complete mess. The court system put me in a position where I had to go get some help. And because of the help that I got, and my mentor was Ed Flowers, a guy who had stopped using heroin and opened up Second Genesis. He stopped using heroin in 1964. I couldn't even imagine that, being clean one day. Now imagine this. Went to 7-Eleven yesterday, and there was a woman on Good Hope Road, and I've been seeing her every day. I usually give her $2 when I leave because I know she's homeless. We never really talked. But when I walked up the other day, she was crying, and I asked, you okay? And, she proceeded to tell me she's addicted to heroin. She can't stop. Her boyfriend got killed 5 months ago, and she is literally sleeping on the street. She doesn't have anybody to kind of help her. And I asked her, do you need help getting in treatment? And if so, we can make that happen. All you have to do, right, is come over. We'll make the referral. We'll get you in. We'll offer you the help. And then I proceeded to connect her to Department of Behavioral Health. But during that time period, she was in such crisis, she ended up walking out because she felt that because she didn't have an ID, nobody was going to help her. Because she doesn't have insurance, nobody could help her. And the reality is, we have to heal. We have to provide avenues of hope. You never know who's going to get this thing and who ain't. You never know. The judge told me to complete a treatment program. Not only did I complete the program, I became the director. You don't know who's the next person's going to be. And as a direct result, now I'm helping people. So the work of peer support workers means everything, whether you're certified or not. Being a peer, right? Being a person who's trained, whether you're a peer or not, we share mutuality of purpose. We want to help, and we want people to heal in our community. And I think I can say that for everybody. And some of the things that were brought up, Dr. Prim, spirituality, it made me think about people like Bob Mickey, some of the other doctors at Howard University Hospital, Elijah Cummings. In my mind, like when Dr. Chapman was able to introduce me to this guy who I saw as a living legend, he was a resource for everybody. Ron Clark, the whole Afrocentric approach to healing. That's why I say, like, DC is a village. We are the elders, and we need to take our community back. We need to provide the services that our community needs. And I applaud the participants today. Leslie, Dr. Chapman, Dwight Jones, Charles Moreland, Paul, I love all you guys, man. And in order to make this work, in order to keep the lights on, we still have to do some things. So imagine if that woman who was so hopeless yesterday had a phone and she could call and go get help. One of the things that we do at Prestige is we have a phone drive, and I'm going to encourage that everyone complete the webinar satisfaction survey, but everyone go to our website, prestigecommunityresources.org. We have two things that may be of interest. One, a peer certification program that we're opening. We plan to graduate at least 40 people a year. Our next class starts very, very soon. You can apply online. Just email me your application, and we will cover the tuition and the stipends at $7,500, $3,000 for tuition, $4,500 stipend to complete 9 weeks of, that's $500 a week for 9 weeks to complete your internship. Where are you going to get that? People are willing to invest in you, and all you got to do is be willing to put your best foot forward and move your life in a positive direction. The other thing is the phone drive. We have a partnership with AT&T, and we buy phones at about $45 a phone, and they come with an unlimited plan. The unlimited plan is roughly about $35 a month for text, talk, and data. A phone can mean the difference of a life being saved or not. that woman had access to a phone, if she had access to services, that could make a difference in her life. And it is unconscionable, you know, for me to see anybody have to sleep on the streets when they don't have to, continue to use drugs when they have other options. We have to do better. We have to do better. And we have that opportunity. I'm encouraged. I love hearing, you know, the panelists that shared today. And yes, Paul, we will have to do a part 2. You know, there are many pathways to recovery. Recovery is much bigger than treatment. Dwight, thank you for sharing your personal experiences. That means all the difference in the world, and you'll be blessed for that. And I'm blessed to be here. I'm going to ask that Asia go ahead and play our phone drive tape. And I just wanted to say, everyone, thank you for joining us. Please go to our website. You can donate and give generously as possible. What I did is I just automatically have it come out my paycheck once a month. And in that way, I'm able to make a significant donation that's tax deductible. And I can help somebody at the same time. Imagine that.
Can I donate as a panelist, Will?
I'm sorry?
Can I donate as a panelist?
Oh, absolutely. I will personally walk you to the website, all that money you're making.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. You guys have a blessed day.
No,
And thank you
can be part of something
Thank
great.
you for all you do.
Do you know you can change a life right from your home? You can help us save poor families living in local communities in DC from the pain and depression of being underserved with basic amenities by simply donating to cover their phone bills. It's that simple. Our campaigns have helped over 2,000 people with about $56,000 in donations and 25 active volunteers. We'd love to do more. Join us at Prestige Community Resources and make the world a better place. Click the link below. Donate.prestigecommunityresources.org.